Today, this biodiversity is fast becoming endangered by modern development and by the sheer pressures and demands of a growing human population. The big issue is supply versus demand. And despite its great wealth in biodiversity and dependence upon those products and services it provides, the ASEAN region is losing its biodiversity at an unprecedented rate. Forests are being cleared for timber and agricultural development. Seas and coral reefs are being overfished, damaged and polluted, with valuable species being collected unsustainably. Wherever man has destroyed too much forest cover, destructive floods and droughts are a constant reminder of the vital importance to better protect this biodiversity. More and more new threats to our environment are emerging. Ecotourism attracts many millions of visitors each year, largely to enjoy the beautiful scenery, vivid culture, and fascinating wildlife. They bring important foreign revenues into our economies, but without proper management, they can also bring about the destruction of the very habitats they wish to see. Ultimately, the loss of biodiversity is one of the greatest threats to the people of ASEAN. Extinction is forever, and with every species lost, the natural ecosystems they once called home become biologically poorer. The critical dilemma now faced by the nations of ASEAN is to try and meet the ever-growing demands from its burgeoning populations with ever-shrinking natural resources. ASEAN's total human population is over 500 million people. In fact, the ASEAN region takes up only 3% of the world's surface, and yet it hosts more than 20% of the world's biodiversity. And while many of these species are common to several countries, ASEAN as a whole is biologically distinct from the rest of the globe. Much of this living heritage is ASEAN's alone. The need for these countries to collaborate in their efforts to protect biodiversity is obvious. 9 of the 10 countries of ASEAN share the same rich seas and fisheries. 5 countries of ASEAN are linked by the meandering Mekong River. 3 countries share the great island of Borneo. And like the immense forests and seas, species do not recognize our political and territorial boundaries. They pay no attention to borders. With the development of these diverse nations, it's clear that whilst each country must share the right to exploit these transboundary resources, they must also accept the shared responsibility for conservation with their neighbors. Dr. Mandita Lim is the chairman of the ASEAN Working Group on Nature Conservation and Biodiversity.
ASEAN needs a collaborative program because we share common resources which need to be protected in a way that's common to all of us. When I see the villages here in Laos, I can easily imagine I am back in the Philippines. Even many of the plants are exactly the same. As I travel around ASEAN, it is marvelous to appreciate the diversity of landscape and fascinating local species. But actually, I really am struck by the so many similarities that we share across such a large geographical region and between different ethnic groups.
Through cooperation, the countries of ASEAN can pool their knowledge, make better use of their species, and find fair ways to share the benefits. All these countries have responded in their own ways. As signatories of the Convention on Biological Diversity, as members of several other international conservation programs, by controlling the trade in wild species, and by setting aside their own networks of protected areas. Finally, in 1999, the recognition of this shared responsibility spawned the development of the ASEAN Regional Center for Biodiversity Conservation, a forum for cooperation and information exchange, and the forging of a stronger ASEAN voice on the international biodiversity stage. Dr. John McKinnon is the European Union co-director of the ARCBC.
At the ASEAN Regional Centre for Biodiversity Conservation, or ARCBC as we call it, I'm the head of the EU team, and we work very closely with the Philippine team, and we coordinate work with the ASEAN governments to help them conserve biodiversity. And I can't overemphasize the importance of doing that. In the long run, if we can conserve these species, these plants and medicines, these will be incredibly valuable for the economy of the people of this region.
The Centre helps strengthen biodiversity conservation by setting up a network of links among ASEAN countries and between ASEAN and the European Union's partner organizations. The Centre promotes the adoption of common standards and best practices, as well as the development of sound policies in all matters of biodiversity management. Johan Cohenberg is the Chargé d'Affaires for the European Community in Thailand.
Well, the EU and the ASEAN have a lot in common. It's a grouping of many different countries, cultural varieties, many different attitudes. And so the EU is very happy to have been able to help the ASEAN. The European Union is paying a lot of attention on biodiversity and is very happy that it could help ASEAN to achieve the maintenance or the preservation of the biodiversity.
The work of the Centre is divided into 4 main components: research projects, widespread networking, capacity development, and data management. On a day-to-day basis, the Centre is run under the Department of Environment and Natural Resources of the Philippines government, acting on behalf of ASEAN and reporting to the ASEAN senior officials on environment. In addition, the Centre is linked to a focal office in each ASEAN country, referred to as a National Biodiversity Reference Unit that acts as a portal through which the Centre makes contact with the research, data and conservation management agencies within each country. From Southeast Asia's highest mountain to wetland reserves and one of the world's largest cave systems, the Centre has helped to revitalize the concept of ASEAN Heritage Parks. These sites represent the best examples of ASEAN's wide range of major habitats and shall serve as a source of wonder and pride for the nations of the region. They are one of the best ways to educate our children and give them a greater appreciation of nature and their surrounding environment.
Download this episode and more Terra at lifeonterra.com.